Hello and welcome to another Album of Record podcast, post-Thanksgiving edition. How's it going, Andrew?
It has been going better, Craig. Last time we recorded, I was in a jovial mood. It was Thanksgiving week, which I was excited about. I was looking forward to Ohio State ending their losing streak against Michigan, and
Then
then,
what happened?
of course, that joke of a game happened, and then I came down with the death cold that's been going around our office here in Columbus, and so I've been dealing with that for a week, and yeah, it's just rough. But this podcast brings me up, so
Yeah.
I'm excited and I'm soldiering through. I'm going to use the mute button to so people don't hear me coughing too much. I try to not chew on my cough drop too loudly, so the mic won't pick that up. But I'm here. You know, sometimes you just got to play through illness, right? So I'm here.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think I'm trashing your hometown when I say that you kind of grew up in the middle of nowhere,
Yes,
Ohio. I think you say that. So
yes.
my Thanksgiving, we go to Indianapolis, and this year we decided to drive through Fort Wayne, Indiana, which means I also drove right past where you grew up in
Yep,
Napoleon,
yep.
Ohio.
Sure did.
But we wanted to do that because I have always wanted to go to Sweetwater, the nation's largest music store, maybe one of the world's largest music stores. It used to be a mostly catalog or a lot of catalog, and now obviously that moved to the internet online. But there are a couple jokes about Sweetwater which I think are really funny, and I had to break out all the jokes because when I told my family we were going to go to a music store, they were like, "What? Why?" Why would we do that? Why would we go an extra 20 minutes out of our way on this trip to Thanksgiving to go to a music store? Why is dad always being so dad and stupid and wasting our time? Because they just didn't understand that Sweetwater is a notable company, an amazing place to visit, kind of a crazy story. But the number one joke that's my favorite is it's the only text message you get from a salesperson where you answer it and you say, "Yeah, I'm available. Give me a call. Let's talk for a half hour."
It's so true.
So yeah, we for those who don't know, Sweetwater, they sell music instruments and pro audio gear, and they are in the Fort Wayne area, and they are notable for being desiring to be and achieving the status of being one of the greatest places to work on earth. They've got this ginormous campus. They've got an on-site music store, which is about the size of 5 former Sam Ashes. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. They have a public facing restaurant which also serves as their cafeteria, which they bring in these amazing chefs. So we not only went there, we looked through the music store. I bought t-shirts. As you can see, I'm wearing a t-shirt. We ate at the restaurant. We walked around, saw the music venue, they've got an on-site barbershop and salon. They've got on-site daycare for their employees. They have what looks to be like a minute clinic. So if you were sick at Sweetwater, you'd walk in, probably deal with a registered nurse who could give you all the strep tests and all the different things and maybe even prescribe you.
I could have used that this week, that's for sure.
And like, I don't think I'm just looking at it through rose-colored glasses. People seem genuinely happy there, and the salespeople that I've ever talked to on the phone seem genuinely happy there. So my sales rep is this dude named Colin Blue, and I did not email him or let him know that I was coming because I felt like I hadn't bought enough over the years to justify special treatment. That like, would you have rung up your sales rep?
But my sales rep is also Colin. He's also my sales rep. Yeah, I definitely would have, even though I'm much the same boat as you. I'm like, what's cool about their sales reps is, well, first of all, you have the same sales rep forever because why would you ever leave that job? Like, all the amenities you talked about. When
Just for retirement, bro.
I talked to Colin about this one time when I was talking to him. He's just like, yeah, he's like, we just, we have our office areas here. He's like, we test out, all the gear, like, because their sales reps have to know like what they're talking about. So they play all kinds of different guitars, different amps, pedals, effects, all that stuff. Like, and most of them are at least part-time musicians themselves too. Like they do gigs and things like that, so they know what they're talking about. And so, but what's cool is they do make you feel like you're every bit as important as any other customer. You know, even when I'm doing, like, I just bought, so I have a Spark amp, which is a sort of like a modeling amp where, you know, it's all digitized, and through the app you can change what amp sounds you want, what effects you have. Well, I just bought the pedal that goes with it, the Control X pedal. You know, it's just like $100 pedal or whatever. You know, I bought it from him, and you know, sure enough, you get the phone call from him. Hey, you know, how's the pedal been working out for you? You know, like, it's just ridiculous that, you know, the detail and personal touch you get. So if I was going, I think I probably would have just been like, hey, can I swing by and say hello or something like that? But
Yeah, well, we were on a bit of a timetable, and so I didn't know if I was going to wear out my all my dad equity with the family
yeah,
on stopping for this trip, but they really did get it by the end of the trip. Everybody really enjoyed the food, which is hysterical to me, but
yeah.
typical. They had a special where I got smoked brisket with green beans on the side, and it was $9.26 after tax. And if I'd been an employee, it would have been like $5.50. Everything
Man,
subsidized for the employees. It was delicious. My kid got pizza, grilled cheeses, and but like really well done, not microwave grade
do
food in
they?
any way, shape, or form.
The real question is, do they give you a bag of candy at the end?
They gave us so I bought all these t-shirts, and and it was buy one get one free. So a family of four, we got four t-shirts, and I got four bags of candy in my
That's
one big
awesome.
bag. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's another thing for people who don't know. Anytime you order from Sweetwater, when you get your delivery, there's a bag of candy in there. Which, again, it's just a nice little touch, you know.
And I always joke with Colin, if I get a bag of candy that doesn't have Fireball, I'm disappointed, because
Uh,
I never buy Fireballs since I was a kid anyway. Back in the drugstore days when you could buy a
yeah,
Fireball for a
yeah,
nickel, but every time I see one, it just brings me back to being 8 or 9 years old when it
yeah.
was
I
a
mean,
challenge to eat one.
when we say a bag of candy, we're not talking Skittles and M's and
No,
Snickers. Like, no, it's Smarties, bit of
what's that?
honey.
Bit o' honey. That's
A
the one I
honey.
was trying to think
That's
of.
that's the one I always look forward to. That's always my favorite. I save that one for last. You know, you get butterscotch. You know, like, just all that kind of hard
And of
candy.
course, the minty star candy or whatever too. But
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
So
But
that
so you
was
didn't
that
you didn't
was
get
my
any gear. You didn't buy any gear there, though. You resisted the temptation. Is that why you brought the family, so your wife could talk you out of buying anything?
well the car was too full of luggage for Thanksgiving, but we did
Yeah.
we bought my son a pair of drumsticks, and we went into the drum room, and I impressed absolutely nobody with my drumming on the electronic drum kit, but
Yeah.
I honestly, I've never had more fun playing an electronic drum kit. They've come a real long way since, I don't know, when they first debuted 20 years ago. I think there might be one in my future. They're just too much fun.
Okay. There
I
you
have
go.
my real drum kit, but and I would never trade that thing for the world. I love that. But sometimes it's not convenient to play a real drum kit in a house full of your family and
Sure.
pets and whatever else. So
Sure.
so if anybody who knows Sweetwater hasn't made the pilgrimage, I recommend it highly. I took my picture with the sign out front, and nobody even looked at me funny. It was awesome.
And truly, like, hashtag not sponsored, but, hey,
God, I wish we were.
Sweetwater if you wanna. But no, seriously, if, like, you've ever been a person that's like, yeah, I kind of like to learn a musical instrument, talk to somebody at Sweetwater. You will not get better customer service. They can tell you what's a good starter kit, like what's good for beginners. Like, they will not lead you astray. They will not upsell you on things you don't need. They've actually talked me out of things before where I thought I needed something, and Colin has told me, like, oh, you don't need to pay for that. Like, legit, like, they're the best. There is not a better customer service company in America. I'm convinced. I've never dealt with better customer service. So
I agree with you. And so everybody was so in by the end of it that Jen was asking questions about the guy who founded it, this guy Chuck. And so all of a sudden I'm looking up podcast interviews with Chuck on YouTube, and we listened to it about the founding of the company and how he came up in the industry as a recording, kind of learned how to be a recording engineer and all the people he's met over the years, and then how it became Sweetwater and all that kind of stuff. And it was fun because it was fun to not only take the family but see them on the turnaround from what the hell are we stopping here for to wow, that's actually pretty cool, which is the highest compliment you can get from teenage sons at at this stage of the game.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so one of the other things that happened since we were last on is a band that you and I will be talking about in our best of 2024, Knocked Loose. They were nominated for a Grammy, which I think we definitely talked about, but then they did an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel. They had Poppy come out and do her part on Suffocate. And first of all, I gotta say, I was rolling my eyes / laughing at all the headlines and the rock press that was like, Jimmy Kimmel fans are outraged by a performance of Knock Loose, because it was like, not really.
Did you see?
They all took one or two Facebook comments of people who were confused and used that to write the headline that Kimmel fans are outraged,
Did you see the guy who said his adolescent son was scared?
which I think had to have been fake.
It had to have been. It had to have
It's
been.
so
But it's still
funny.
absolutely hilarious. Yeah.
But it led to a conversation between you and me about the fact that this did happen. Knocked Loose is a screaming only band, and they were on national TV. It's notable. It's crazy. But the question that I had is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, or maybe we'll just rip the Band-Aid off now. Like, what is it about Knocked Loose that caused them to break through this time at this moment to be on Kimmel? It almost, it's hard for me. I love it, but I've always loved screamy music basically since I was 14.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to pinpoint it.
Yeah, like for most of our lives, hardcore music has been a very underground, insular community, right? Like, has not had much breakthrough success. It's just kind of been their own thing off to the side. And what was interesting and what I think led to Knock Loose being here really is, this is typical me fashion. I have my favorites or things that I always fall back on, but I truly believe that a lot of this has to do with Turnstile's breakout with their album Glow On in 2021, which became just a phenomenon the size of which you could have never imagined a hardcore band could achieve. Now, to be clear, Turnstile, while they are a hardcore band, they don't have screaming vocals. Brendan, their singer, he he'll kind of like yell a little bit, but like it's not screaming vocals. He sings, there's vocal melodies, but I felt like that was kind of like the Nirvana moment. Like that was the breakthrough that introduced hardcore to the masses and sort of introduced people to this idea of this heavy melodic music with these like serious breakdowns. Like, you know, whereas like when we grew up, heavy metal music was all about the riff and hardcore music is like all about the breakdown, these just fantastic breakdowns. And Knocked Loose.
So let's go back a second. When you and I were growing up early, metal was the riff and it was speed. And then in the late 90s and early 2000s with the Korn, Stained, System of a Down to some degree, even Rage, it was the groove, the metal groove, but they didn't have the riff per se. And I think you're right. You're onto something with the breakdown.
Yeah, and the breakdown is sort of what separates hardcore from, metal. And again, like hardcore has elements like in punk as well. It's this fusion of the two.
Like the short songs. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. So anyways, Knocked Loose has been around for a while. I think their debut album came out in 2016, I believe. So, they've been around. Heard about them with A Different Shade of Blue, which came out around 2018, I think, something like that. That was sort of my introduction to them, and I always liked them. They certainly like developed a really like intense following in the hardcore scene. Like they were very well respected. They were always seen as this band that had some kind of potential. But I think when Turnstile sort of kicked that door open and invited the world to see like what else is in this scene. I think it just created the perfect environment for Knocked Loose to become sort of, I say, the Soundgarden of it, because I don't think it's right to call them the Pearl Jam of it. I don't know who the Pearl Jam of hardcore is yet. Maybe we haven't figured that out quite yet. But maybe the Soundgarden, like they were this already established, like well respected band that sort of, once that door was open and people were like, oh, hey, what is this band doing? It's different from what Turnstile is doing. It allowed them to, sort of get introduced to this world. And so the Knocked Loose album has just, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to, has just been enormous this year. It's the hardcore album of the year. It's one of my absolute favorite albums of the year. And so it's just really cool to see like Jimmy Kimmel, like realizing like, hey, this band is getting some attention on a lot of festivals. They're playing pretty big shows. They played Kemba Live here in Columbus, which is our like second biggest outdoor venue. It's got the indoor and outdoor sides to it. They did the outdoor show with the in the pavilion, so I mean it's a pretty decent sized show. Like hardcore for the longest time was playing in these like tiny, like couple hundred people clubs, and now suddenly they're playing to thousands of people. And so
Yeah,
Jimmy,
growing up at the Agora Theater, the metal bands would play the theater and the hardcore bands would play the ballroom. And
right,
that's kind of how it worked. The ballroom was, I don't know, 300-400 people, and the theater was maybe a couple thousand at most.
yeah,
And that was the separation. But now, the other thing that occurred to me, and you and I talked about this earlier, it's always funny when we have a conversation on Discord and then we're like, we're going to have to recreate this live on the podcast. We shouldn't have the
yeah,
conversation privately before we have it. But the other thing, because it's interesting to me that you bring up Turnstile and kind of breaking through. Yeah, that album came out in 2021, but it really took a couple of years for that wave to kind of crest where they end up being an opener for Blink 182 on the world tour. I think the world tour, at least the American leg, whatever it is. But it's also, Jimmy Kimmel's in his late 50s and he had a history of being on rock radio. And you and I are firmly in middle age now. And we've essentially been listening to heavy, screamy music since we were early teenage years, maybe mid teenage years. The mainstream, you can laugh about pop metal and new metal all you want, but essentially that screaming music has been mainstream since the late 90s. If you start with Rage Against the Machine, you could start in the early to mid 90s, but screaming music has been at least somewhat considered mainstream since the 90s. And now all of us who are in middle age have grown up with screaming music. And so it's not quite as jarring. Headlines on Facebook aside about Jimmy Kimmel fans hating and being scared and whatever else, it's not so far out of the realm of normalcy that screaming music would be, graduating to mainstream television.
you think about like even well, like Jonathan Davis from Korn, like that was not the same type of screaming, but it was an unorthodox sort of vocal approach. But I even think of like System of a Down when, oh my gosh, what was that? What was their big breakthrough song? The from Toxicity. What was that? Oh my gosh,
Chop Suey.
Chop Suey. Thank you. When Chop Suey came out, and had some screaming in that, like that, and that was a huge song that was everywhere. And System of a Down was a very popular band for a long time. So you're right. Like this has been around. Like so, as people our age are becoming, influencer, like again, Jimmy
Decision
Kimmel,
makers.
decision makers and influencers. I think it's not like totally out of left field for us to hear something like that, regardless of how much you might like that kind of music. I don't think it's quite the same jarring effect as it would have been without some of these trailblazers that came before. But I think it's really cool. Like I've really enjoyed seeing, hardcore music just sort of have its moment. And you're seeing a lot of big, festivals. They're getting pretty high billing on these, Turnstile is getting like second billing on main stages at a lot of festivals. And, Knocked Loose is right there with them now. And I think it's really, really good for the scene. And I'm excited to see, where that goes, like who's going to be the next breakthrough to come out of it. Like it's fun, and it just feels like we're just getting started with it. So pretty cool.
I think it also speaks to the fractured nature of music today and the nichification. Everything's a niche now. Because even when you and I shared that clip in the Discord with our friends and some of our peers, some of the guys are much younger than we are.
Yeah,
And yeah, they're all guys at this point, but most people weren't interested in it, didn't really like it. And
yeah,
I think there, so even as it hits the mainstream, nothing gets to be mainstream anymore because
yeah.
everyone's so specific in their little corners of taste. Well, most people are anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's all relative. When I say Turnstile is like the Nirvana and Knocked Loose is a Soundgarden, they're not going to sell millions of, tens of millions of copies of their albums the way those bands did. So it's all relative, but there it would have been literally like 5 years ago. I never would have thought that we could have seen bands like this getting this kind of billing and being on mainstream talk shows. And I talked about at the time, like Turnstile doing a Tiny Desk, like that was like one of the coolest things to see a hardcore band do a Tiny Desk, and since then, like Soul Glow has done it. Like we're seeing like some of these bands get like these opportunities to like really showcase a different side of themselves, and it's really cool.
And if it only happens once, it's just kind of a novelty where it's almost like a punchline and somebody's like, let's see what happens when we put this screamy band or this hardcore band on Tiny Desk. But if it
Yeah,
happens a second time, then all of a sudden it gets more and more normalized.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
So
and honestly, that was the focus of the remember the In Bloom video that Nirvana did where they pretended like they were on a TV show in the 50s or 60s, like a Dick Clark kind of a figure announcing
absolutely,
them.
it was great. It was fantastic.
Nirvana. All right, so we are some crusty old men, as everybody knows, and this is a Pearl Jam podcast. So the other thing that happened recently, we're not right on the 30th anniversary of Vitalogy by Pearl Jam, but it was released November 22nd, 1910. You and I could not let a 30-year anniversary go by without talking about one of the most interesting records from our one of our most favorite bands.
If we did 30 years of throwing copper, there's no way we weren't doing 30 years of Vitalogy.
I didn't even think of it like that. That's a
let me
really
just
great point.
let me just put that out there. But yeah, no, it's pretty cool to think about. Like, well, it's also a little bit alarming to think about the fact that this album's been around for 30 years. It's funny. I told you this story when I was in college. I bought Vitalogy on vinyl. I didn't have a record player yet, but I just bought it with the expectation that at some point in my life I'm going to own a nice record player, and it would be cool to have Vitalogy on vinyl. I'm pretty sure it was probably the first Pearl Jam record I bought on vinyl. And for anybody who doesn't know, Pearl Jam put Vitalogy out on vinyl before it came out on CD. So when they released it, that November 22nd date, I'm not sure if that's the vinyl release date or if that's the CD. I think that's the vinyl. I think the CD didn't come out till December something, if my memory serves correctly.
Well, I know they released it 2 weeks early on vinyl,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd kind of
Which
forgotten
again
about
is
that.
such a funny Pearl Jam thing to do, but anyways, so I had it on vinyl, the
Well, yeah, you're
original
right. It was released on December 6th
on
through
CD.
CD and cassette.
Oh yeah, and cassette, of course. But yes, and so when I was in college, I lived in this apartment where I lived in the, I'm going to use air quotes here, finished part of a basement, and by finished I mean somebody had rolled some carpet out on the concrete floor, And
You couldn't put
anytime,
posters on the cinder
yeah,
block walls.
yeah, oh, there was cinder block walls, there was, and but anytime it would rain, my room would flood. That carpet would get all wet, and eventually, over time, like some of my bookcases and my computer stand, it would absorb all that water through the bottom, and it just ruined like tons of books that I had and stuff. Well, one of the things it impacted was my copy of Vitalogy, and it got a little bit warped. And so now that I have a record player, I was listening to the record, and every time it would get to Nothing Man, it would just start endlessly skipping. It could not get through it. And so I would have to like kind of knock the needle past that point. And I was like, you know what? This is ridiculous. So, I knew Pearl Jam had put out a 30th anniversary edition of Vitalogy on vinyl, a two record LP. And So I was like, well, I think I'll buy that. So I go to Pearl Jam's website, whatever, it was $30, $35, something like that. Then you get the like $15 shipping on top of that. And I'm like, this is stupid. So then I went to Amazon, checked Amazon. Sure enough, Amazon had it, free shipping. And so, yeah, so I got it. It's my new copy of the Vitalogy. But it's been great to like listen to it and revisit. And we're going to kind of share some of our thoughts and memories from it. But I, I think the thing I want to just start with maybe is just to ask before we get into anything specific. Just overall, do you remember like what was your impression of this album when it first came out?
Oh, yeah. So my first impression, I was buying all the CD singles. So I had the Spin the Black Circle CD single. I think it had that weird red cover with the record on it. So I was so in the tank for this record. There was no way that I wasn't going to love it, no matter what they did. And I don't remember the timing of them being on SNL and hearing Not For You, but
So I think that was well before the album, I believe. I'm pretty
I think
sure that
so too.
that Not For You performance was before the album came out.
Because I heard Not For You way before this record came out. Somehow, some way, I remember. And I think it was the SNL performance. And I was in. Not For You is one of the most powerful songs that band ever produced, ever wrote, ever played. And it was just, it matched up with where I was as a 14, 15-year-old, getting a little bit heavier, a little bit more guttural, a little bit more dangerous in my musical taste. I was still a lame suburban white kid in Northeast Ohio, but I was feeling more dangerous and I wanted to be braver with my music choices and everything else. And Pearl Jam was starting to do that too, which I mean, it's kind of funny to say that now because it's tame
Sure.
compared to whatever, but time and place. One of the things that I noticed, and I'd like to hear your memories on this thing too, is as we're revisiting it now, I kind of in my mind had convinced myself that Dave A had not played many of the drum parts on this record
Oh no,
because he
I knew.
didn't tour it. And now it has me really thinking hard, like they must have coached him up to play very differently than the way he played on the previous records, because the drums don't sound the same and the style almost doesn't sound the same, where I had kind of retconned myself into thinking that Jack Irons played the majority of this record, which he did not.
Yeah, so there's a lot to get into with that. I will say, like, my memories of it as well are very similar to yours. Like, this is a
Oh, did
diff-
you want to share your memories as well? Was that,
well,
is that how the podcast works?
it kind of is gonna lead into what you're talking about,
No,
but
I'm
I,
sorry. I was making fun of myself for not obviously handing it back to you to give your answer to the same
sure,
question.
sure, sure. So I'll just steal the baton. But no, this is a very different Pearl Jam album from the first two. The first two, as different, and those two albums are different from each other in their own ways as well, but they were still they still had these big like stadium anthem, the very front and center Mike McCready solos, all of that stuff. This album, like, just off the top of my head, like, what's a Mike McCready solo that you can think of off the top of your head on this album, right?
Well, even the quote unquote solo and Tremor Christ, it's not. I mean, that song
Yeah,
doesn't make way for that.
yeah. These aren't so these are not stadium anthem songs. These are all much closer to punk, and it's a lot of sort of you hear a lot of the Who influence in this as well. And that's because Ed had taken the reins creatively for this album. This is by far the most heavily Ed influenced Pearl Jam album. And where I think that matters is, you know, I remember interviews with members of the band talking about this, that like they weren't really communicating very well when they made this album, and they sort of recorded it in various different studios in different cities. It was more of a just whenever they had some time, and a lot of these songs were being written like literally like an hour before they recorded them. So it was very spontaneous, and I think that probably impacted the way Dave played the drums on this, because they didn't have the time to really flesh a lot of this out. A lot of it was done on the spot. And what I think is interesting about that is when you hear what people, particularly what Ed and Jeff have said about them, parting ways with Dave was a lot of it was that they didn't feel that they spoke the same musical language. I remember one interview Jeff had talked about like, they just didn't relate musically. That like Jeff would say, "Hey, can you play something more like?" and he would cite a reference, and Dave wouldn't know that reference because they came from different musical worlds, if you will. They were always a little bit of an arranged marriage, Dave and the rest of the guys in Pearl Jam, and so I think all those factors probably play into why the drumming does sound and feel different on this album. But yeah, no, it definitely is still Dave A who did everything except Satan's Bed. His drum tech did the drums on that song because I don't know, Dave had like, he had some kind like a surgery or he had some kind of medical emergency or something going on that he wasn't available. So they had his drum tech record the drums for Satan's Bed, and Foxy Mop, Jack Irons did the drums on that. But yeah, so this is definitely like a band that was in transition. This is the direct middle piece between. So like a lot of people cite the first 5 Pearl Jam albums as like the core. That's your Pearl Jam core, the essential first 5 albums, and this is a clear middle piece between Ten and Verses on one side and No Code and Yield on the other. And Vitalogy is just this middle piece that really stands alone in the Pearl Jam catalog in terms of just how these songs feel, how they were written. It's a very different Pearl Jam album.
Yeah, and it definitely, from a production standpoint, it continues to sound more organic and raw, because 10 sounded almost stilted like late 80s, and then Versus sounds still very professional and very
It's
finished,
loud. It's loud.
and it's
Versus is a
loud,
loud.
but
Yeah.
you can start to hear kind of more of the organic tones. It's not quite as compressed. And now this one is a step even further in that direction, where some of this sounds like it could have been done in one take. They didn't overdo any of the production on the instruments. It's the closest thing that we'd gotten to Pearl Jam sounding like a garage rock band, to the point where when they were doing some live performances for Monkey Wrench Radio, is that what it was
Yep.
called?
Monkey Wrench. Yep.
And you're listening to not necessarily Ed and his vocals, but you're listening to the guitars and the drums recorded during those sessions, and you're saying, yeah, it's not that much different than what ended up being on the record. Yeah, the timing's a little bit off because they're playing live and they're playing off of each other, but the tones and the sonic quality was very similar. The live version played over the radio to what we had on the record.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, like, I remember staying up. I think it was a Sunday night, or maybe it was a Saturday night. Maybe it was a Saturday night. But I remember staying up late and recording on cassette that Monkey Wrench because they broadcast it, and a lot of rock radio stations actually picked it up, and one of the ones in Toledo did. And so I don't know if I still have it. I probably don't. But at one point, I had the original Monkey Wrench, the whole show recorded on cassette tape, and I used to listen to that all the time. But no, and you're spot on. Like, and again, I think it leads to the way these songs were written and recorded. Like, it just all has a
Well,
very
Monkey Wrench Radio is the one from '98.
well, no, they did more than one. They did more than one for sure.
Self Pollution Radio is '95.
Oh, maybe that. Well, okay, but well, maybe they did call it that. I was thinking they called it Monkey Wrench that then too, but maybe I'm mistaken in my old age. But
I was trying to find a date on it.
yeah, yeah,
January 8th, 1995.
okay. So yeah, so it was right after the album came out. But yeah, I think like this album is funny too. Like it really like speaks to where you and I are like the perfect age to go on this journey with Pearl Jam. Like because when 10 came out, for our age, it was a dangerous album. Like it really was. Like I think to listen to it today and to like I think it's really hard to see how that could be viewed that way. But it was rebellious. It was different than what was on the radio. And there was an edginess to it, and particularly like the music video for Jeremy was dark, and like there was a lot of mystery around the band, and Ed was a very charismatic frontman that you wanted to know more about. But then, as we sort of progressed in this world and we got a little bit older and maybe wanted something to be a little angrier, we got Versus. And Versus is an angrier record than 10 is, you know, and we were along for that ride. And then for me, as I started like discovering punk and getting more into that, you know, along comes Vitalogy. So it was like, it was almost like it was just like detailing this like roadmap for where I was going in my own personal coming of age and discovery. And I think that's always like the unique phenomenon when Craig and I talk about Pearl Jam, we talk about this a lot. Like we can't help but be victims of our circumstances, right? Like we are of this age. Like we grew up with this band in this era of, you know, grunge music and like, you know, so of course this all means something a little bit, I don't want to say more, but just unique or special to our experience and how we felt at that age. Like it was just, I just feel like we just really came of age with this band and we were just like right along for the ride with them where they were going. And so for me, this was just the perfect album to come out at that time.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of what it also delivered, in terms of songs that were different than anything we'd heard before, the I think about some of the slower ones like Nothing Man and Immortality, you know, just songs that tugged at your heartstrings, were just brutal listens, but the kind of songs that probably helped me later on become kind of an emo fan much later on in college. And so there's a lot of building blocks for things that I ended up loving in different genres or different subgenres of rock music later. I hear a lot of the building blocks in those early Pearl Jam records, and as they were branching out, and certainly some of the punk songs too, some of the, like even a song like Tremor Christ. Tremor Christ is not fast enough to be punk
No,
necessarily. It's like plotting and dirty and nasty, but not in a grunge way where the verse chorus loud soft loud. It didn't have any of that,
I always
almost
call
to the
those
point
things like,
where when he does the chorus, the band essentially drops out and it's just vocals. It's like a reverse chorus almost.
yeah.
And so it just, those kind of structural things helped me probably push the envelope into other things later.
Yeah, I always call those things like punk in attitude more than punk in sound. And so like when we talk about punk, I think that in reference to some of this stuff, that's kind of what we're referring to. It was the attitude or ethos of this album anyways. And you know, like yeah, even a song like Corduroy, like certainly, you know, by no means a punk song, but even a song like that, which was sort of aimless and directionless, you know, which to me I still think very fondly of that this song, and I love the song. I like the song a lot more than you do, I know. But
No,
like,
no, no. I love it, but I can't help but think about it today as a fully formed adult going, oh, yeah, they didn't finish it.
yeah,
But no, I love it. It's one of my favorite Pearl Jam songs of all
but
time.
that's just where they were. They didn't have to do it. It was just like, let's write this and like let's just put it down on tape, let's record it and then put it out. And you just feel the way all these things that were going on with the band. I mean, again, you have to remember this is the first Pearl Jam album after Kurt Cobain's suicide. It's
They're
at a
fighting
time
Ticketmaster.
they're fighting Ticketmaster, they're fighting each other in the band. You know, there's definitely a dynamic of Stone versus Ed in terms of who's going to control the vision and the sound of this band. You know, this was originally Stone Gossard's band, really. And at this point, Ed had pretty much taken control and said, no, this is my band. And he's also reacting to the fact that this is around the time that the crazy deranged fan drove her car into his house. You know, he's
I forgot
being,
about that
yeah,
completely.
like this was all happening right around this time where he's dealing with like all this notoriety and fame. And I think he just kind of said, look, if I'm going to deal with all these side effects, like I'm the one who's going to decide what this band does. And you know, so all that turmoil and unease and, you know, displacement, it's all present. You just feel it in so many of these songs. Now, the irony and counter of that is it also has one of their most beautiful songs in terms of Better Man, like the poppiest, one of the pop, probably the poppiest song they did at that point. Like
A song that I didn't like, I didn't hate it, but I didn't gravitate toward it, and I've only come around on it here much later as it's become such a staple live. It's such a celebration live, but I think
Yeah,
as a song, it's still pretty mediocre.
I never.
Yeah, that one, and it's interesting because I think this is the first Pearl Jam record where I wasn't completely all in on every single track. As much as I love this one, as much as I will not apologize for anything, I didn't think Spin the Black Circle was all that great. It was the first time where they let off with a single where I was like, okay, we get it, guys.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to Better Man, like to this day, I would say the album version I don't particularly like love. Like I would not say it's one of my favorite Pearl Jam songs, the album version, but the live version of the song I've always really enjoyed. And I remember hearing it on bootlegs. I had the Atlanta 90. I think I'm pretty sure they played it at the Soldier Field bootleg from 95. That was really popular at that time. And hearing it on these live bootlegs, like I always loved Better Man there. So I always felt like that was one where like maybe they didn't capture the same energy that it produces live um, on the album, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's definitely true. I think that's definitely true. But I think that also speaks to where I was as a music fan, where I was branching out a little bit and maybe being a little bit critical where I might not have been before. Because I felt like when I was a young fan, well, a younger fan, I was still a young fan, but when I was a younger fan, I felt like if I rode for Pearl Jam, I had to ride for all of it, and I had to defend them for everything that they did. And by the time I'm 14, 15, I'm going, I don't have to do that. I can kind of take what I want and leave the rest. And it's interesting. That was part of our conversation with Smashing Pumpkins and Melancholy, which also came out around this time period. And so some of it's me and some of it's the artists pushing boundaries and doing stuff where you shouldn't like everything that they do because they're taking chances.
I think for me that came more with No Code at the time because while today No Code is probably a top three all time Pearl Jam album for me, at the time I was definitely not fully on board with that shift in vibe and direction that they went with No Code. I was like, well, what is it? So I think some of that came for me a little bit later, maybe than Vitalogy, but you know, like look, Vitalogy also has this. It's like you've got these songs like Pride 2, I Davanita, Foxy Ma, Panel Mama, like these things like I, I don't know if you would call them experimental or like I to this
I'd call
day
them filler.
I to this day I don't know necessarily even what artistic purpose they were going for with those, but it was just a band that was really seemed to be trying to really show that they were just going to do what they wanted to do. They were officially done with any pretext whatsoever of them being this band that was trying to play the major rock act game, right? Like this was them just saying, we're just putting out what we want to put out now. Like we're doing what we want to do. There were, again, no music videos. They released it on vinyl for, I think, me. Yeah, I'm looking right here. Spin Black Circle was the only single that was actually released before the album came out. Not For You as a single didn't come out till February. So, like, at that point, like, this was definitely a statement in that way as well that, they didn't care about being what everybody wanted them to be anymore. And that was sort of the beginning of them pushing back. Now, No Code again took that to an entirely another level where it was like this complete deconstruction of everything where they were like, we are going to weed out everybody who's just not along for the ride with us. Like we are totally changing everything. But I think like even to get to that point in No Code, and then eventually like all of this leads to what I think Yield became, but I think for them to get to that point this album had to come first, and I think it's cool to reflect on the fact that again that 30 years later like a lot of these feelings still reside within me when I listen to it. Like I this album almost more than 10 in verses pulls me back to a place in time. Like I feel pulled back to my 14, 15-year-old self listening to this album, like maybe more so than even, Ten in Verses.
So yeah, I can definitely agree with that. And someday when we talk about no code, that one brings me back too, because that one has very distinct energy with friends, and I was driving by that point and getting ready, that was August, getting ready to enter my senior year of high school, and so I'm really finding myself at that point. But the other really notable thing, you mentioned the lack of singles, but of course, Better Man breaks out and becomes a single. Corduroy was never released. It ends up
No.
charting on Billboard at number 13 without a proper release, which is
Yeah,
unbelievable. But this band decided that they weren't even going to release. I don't think there was ever a cassette or a CD single for that one. So
there was not. Definitely was
you
not.
they could have probably made another $10 million or whatever it is by selling singles of that song, and they didn't do it. So this was a band. We talk about this a lot in the movie industry, where a director or a writer will have a wild success and they use some of that equity to make a passion project or to do it their own way. And this is Pearl Jam using some of their built up artistic equity, because nobody could tell them no anymore. They were minted. They were goaded. They achieved the mountaintop, and expressing themselves and really trying to push the boundaries of who and what they were going to be. It it worked out for them. That's how good they were. That's how good their fastball was in that moment. That even when they just kind of rolled out of bed, this is what they were able to do, which is unbelievable.
Which is funny. Like, try as they might, like, to just to do their own thing. This album still sold, what, I don't know, 6 million copies, somewhere, something like that. I mean, it's still, I know at the time the vinyl set a record for the most copies of vinyl ever sold in a week. I'm sure that has since been surpassed, but I know it did. It set that record at the time. It sold still, like, while it didn't sell as many as Versus, it still sold a lot of copies.
All right, so it debuted at number 55 on the Billboard 200 when it was only the LP. It sold 34,000 copies in its first week, and until Jack White's Lazaretto in 2014, it held the record for most vinyl sales in 1 week.
And that's insane.
Yeah. And then it
So
went to number 1 on the Billboard 200, selling more than 877,000 copies in its first week. The second fastest selling album in history behind Versus.
So, it's funny that we just talk about, like, we just talked all these ways in which they were just trying to carve their own path and, throwing out the playbook, not
No
playing by the
MTV.
record, not playing by anybody else's rules. And they still topped out Billboard, sold tons of copies, still just massively popular. And again, I think all this leads into where that's why no code became what no code was. I really do truly believe that this was all just this linear path leading to what no code and yield became for the band. So like, this is just such a important album in that direction of the band, like this sort of teetering, because, like, this is like, when you hear the band talk about it, like, if ever there was a time that this band was seriously close to breaking up, it was around this time, that they weren't getting along really well. There was a lot of, not, I don't know if it was like infighting, but they talk, again, the lack of communication. They weren't talking to each other really well. They weren't necessarily agreeing. You know, I think Stone and Mike have talked about a little bit how, like, they kind of wanted to, like, hey, let's keep playing this. You know, we've spent our whole lives trying to be in rock bands. Like, maybe we should not bite the hand that's feeding us too much. And Ed's just like, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. And so all these factors play into sort of how I view the context of this album today. I think even like I even think it's funny too, like, not to get into things like, again, projecting my own thoughts or opinions onto lyrics that I didn't write, but, like, I think it's funny, like a song like Satan's Bed, like, which is easy to perceive as this, like, scathing, like, song, like, lashing out against, like, the sort of, like, supermodel industry and like how we treat and view celebrities. And then, Ed later marries a supermodel. Like you hear people talk about that from time to time, which I always think is kind of funny. But like, I think this is just a statement of where this band was, like this transition period between these sort of two eras of Pearl Jam.
So I think we should finish it out by saying that there was some breaking news in the Pearl Jam world today that
Oh yeah,
they
oh
did
yeah, oh
announce
yeah.
the
I can't
dates
believe we didn't
for
talk about this.
they did announce the dates for their 2025 tour, and I don't know all the dates, but for you and me, the most important one is they're playing 2 nights in Pittsburgh. Were you
Yes.
surprised that they're playing 2 nights in Pittsburgh at a college basketball arena?
Very surprised and very excited about this. Well, excited and I told you like of this feeling of dread of like, oh shit, here we go again. Like entering into the fan club lottery, and we'll see if I get in this time. I got, we talked about this at the time, but for the 2024 tour, I got shut out of both Seattle and Chicago. So I'm trying again for Pittsburgh, and yes, I'm still like hit with that sticker shock when you see the price, the $185 per ticket. It's like, geez, like especially right now while I'm, busy buying all of the Christmas presents, and the wallet is just bleeding money right now, and I have to do this. But like, as much as I complain, like the prospects of seeing them play, smaller arena, it's very exciting to me. Like, I really hope I can get into that show.
Do you think you'll ever get used to the $185 ticket price? Because I've pretty well normalized it now, especially
I
as someone who paid even more than that for a premium seat for the second night of Fenway. I'm just, I'm kind of over it. I think that's just what it costs now. Used to be able to buy a car for $22,000. Now, $30,000 cars don't exist. They're 40 to 45
Yeah,
almost
I
across the board.
you know, you're not wrong about any of that, but it still just hits me. Like, it just does when well, after fees and everything, it's 300 whatever it was, 370 whatever dollars that you're just like,
Well, for
gotta,
two,
yeah, for two,
yeah.
you're like, "Ah, I gotta click that button, and it's, I don't know if I'll get used to it, but like, I've accepted it, but it's still, you just look at it and it's like, man, I just, I, I'm such an old man because I'm just like, I remember the days when I got fan club tickets for $25,
Yeah.
those
Well, and I'm so spoiled that if I do get tickets, I probably will stay overnight in a hotel. But at 2 hours distance, I could absolutely drive home and
ads.
save myself another couple $100 in hotel fees and whatever else. But it's funny, just and this is my last. I'll leave you with this because I'm not that great about coming around and getting all the details together so that I can we were finally settling up for the Boston trip this past week, and the one we'd already done the Pearl Jam tickets, we'd already done the hotel and the airfare, but we had not done the Manchester Orchestra show
All
where
right.
at the House of Blues. So my friend was like, "Hey, all right, let me down easy, let me know what it is," and I'm like, "Hey, after fees, it was $49.56." And he was like, "Oh my God, I was expecting so much worse."
Yes. So see, there's still
And
bargains out
this is the market inefficiency, by the way. And I've been trying to convince my kids of this. If you fall in love with bands small enough, you'll never pay too much for a ticket in your entire life. You'll be
there. It is
paying
true.
$28 or $24 or whatever it is. You'll be nice up close and personal. You might be able to buy a shirt directly from them at the merch table. If you're old enough to drink, you might be able to share a drink with them if they still drink. You never know.
Until they play Jimmy Kimmel.
Until
Then
they play Jimmy Kimmel.
the knocked loose tickets at Kemba Live were 50 some dollars, which was just like, again, yes, that's what it costs to go see a band at Kemba, but like for a
So less
hardcore
than a
show, it's
third,
just like, oh my god.
but less than a third of the cost of Pearl Jam
Let's
at a basketball arena in Pittsburgh.
it's all relative, baby.
All right, you got anything else, or should we say
No,
goodbye?
I think we did the thing here. It's just fun to revisit, and obviously, like, we say all the time we're not a Pearl Jam podcast, but like we talk about them an awful lot, and it's always fun. Like we probably could have gone into like track by track and things like that, but I just kind of thought it was more fun to like take a big picture, reflective look back on like what this album still means to us 30 years
Yeah.
later.
Well, and I think the real gift for you and me is that this gives us an excuse to go back and listen to it again for the millionth time. But so every time we have a conversation like this and I hear what you're talking about, which is necessarily a little bit different than everything that I'm talking about, or I discover like, oh yeah, your memory was wrong. Dave A did play on this record. Now I get to go back and hear it with fresh ears, which nobody like myself deserves after 30 years of listening to this record over and over again. So I hope everybody out there enjoys kind of going back and revisiting the records as much as you and I do.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you guys for listening to us on the podcast, for following us on YouTube. That YouTube audience continues to grow. It's awesome. Awesome. If you didn't check out the episode with Oliver Barrett, the Pearl Jam poster artist, there were a lot of good visuals on that one. You should definitely check that one out on YouTube. There's also a visual element, a visual video version of that one on Spotify. So whatever you do, check out the video version, share it with a friend, do all the things that help us. Go to albumofrecord.com, sign up for free so that this podcast hits your inbox whenever we release an episode, usually once a week, usually on Fridays. And thanks so much. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you next time. It's the Album of Record podcast.